Okay, hey everyone, I'm here with Ben, and in today's video, we'll be talking about topics like individualism, going your own way, dreams, and idealism, and whatever comes up, really. So, first, I want to start with just asking uh, what is time in your life when you did something that required you to go your own way, and uh, maybe sometimes disappoint other people in the process?
I suppose it's from necessity, really. I think for me, when through crisis, when change has been forced upon me, when my whole life has been turned upside down, it was a very good way. It was the shock to the system was a very good way of evaluating myself, of who I was, and I realized in that was one crisis that happened to me just after university, and I needed help. And I had friends, but I realized my friends, they were nice people superficially, but they were not people who could really understand myself. I didn't really know them in a deep way. I couldn't open up to them or explain things. So I realized I was very much alone, and I had to find my own way of trying to make sense of the situation I was in, and try to find ways to help myself and to try to connect with my own emotions through, this is when I got into writing, and to try to answer my own questions, because I didn't have that in place. I had superficial friendships, but not anyone who could really help me, so I couldn't just lean on people who I knew. I had to find my own way.
Yeah. There's a lot of things to kind of unpack there on how you have meaningful friendships with other people, and how do you make yourself understood by other people when you're going through something that's difficult, or something that maybe they have not experienced or been through. And on top of that, perhaps what you said about writing and journaling, right? Because I think a lot of people don't really introspect on their life and why they do the things that they do, or what they are feeling, or why they make the choices that they make, right? And maybe they don't even talk about it with other people, right? So, like, how would you say writing has helped you get to know yourself? Like, has it taught you anything specific about yourself, or helped you admit to something important about you?
Yeah, I mean, I started off just connecting with my emotions, and I had a latitude and an impunity to say whatever I wanted to say. There was no shame involved in that, whereas you can be very self-conscious and awkward when you begin to try to open up to someone, you try to articulate things for the first time. So I started just sort of free writing and writing some poetry and really connecting with my emotions, and what I put down didn't matter. It could be embarrassing, but so what? I just had that freedom just to, in the most raw language, say what I kind of felt in my heart, and often it was senseless, but it was a way to try to get a feel of what was going on inside me without a sense of shame.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And maybe that's also why it's so easy to feel kind of misunderstood when we open up to other people about things, right? Because if you start to feel a certain way, a lot of the time you don't even have the vocabulary to express what it is that you're feeling or thinking. And so you try to tell your partner or friend about it, but you use the wrong words, and you don't know how to translate it, and you don't actually know exactly what it means. So perhaps what you say sounds a bit rude or blunt or harsh, or perhaps it's like only a part of the truth, but not the entire thing, right? Like maybe there's been this small thing that's been bothering you for a while, and it's built up over time. And when you talk about it, it sounds like it's a big thing, or bigger than what it is as well, right? So I guess with journaling, it kind of helps you find the words for it. You can kind of rehearse for some social situations as well, to the point where, later on, really how to talk about it. So it becomes a bit more clear to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the hardest things when you try and open up to someone is you always feel there's so much context that needs to be given, and you can waste a huge amount of time trying to explain the context that gives you the window into exactly what you're feeling. But without a lot of practice talking about it, and I think writing's so valuable is it can help you pick out within the context what's most integral within the context, and you can explain the context in very few words once you understand what the context is yourself. So then you can more directly just say how you feel about something without needing to justify the context, which before was very confusing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because when you're going through like a change in your life too, right? I've had that many times. You going through a transition and you try to talk about it, but you also don't really know where you're going, right? So people get very confused and perhaps even unsettled during that process because you appear to be going in the wrong direction, and of course you're going to correct it as you go, and you're going to change it slightly, and what ends up happening is like it looks like a big mess. And ultimately you're on the right track, you're figuring things out, and how you figure things out is you sometimes fall a bit to the left and sometimes a bit too much to the right, but ultimately you learn to find your own balance as you go, right?
Yeah, because I think ultimately we have different sides of ourselves, we have contradictions within us, we want one thing but then also we want the other thing, and without the practice of becoming familiar with what it is we feel, the different sides of ourselves, if we haven't talked about it sufficiently, we haven't written it down and become clear in our own mind that on the one hand you want this, on the other hand you want that, when you're confused between exactly what you want, this comes out, I think, in a muddle in the conversation, and it ends up, I think I've found in my experience that conversations like that, it can just be very frustrating because you just realize what a muddle everything is within your head, and you haven't been able to really say what you feel, the choices you're weighing up between you veer off in one direction talking about something else, and then you cross over into something else, and it all becomes muddled up together. So I think when you're clear about, which I found writing was valuable for, or like meaningful conversations with people over time as well, when you're clear about the dilemmas and the conflicting parts of yourself and the choices you're trying to weigh up, when you're clear about those, you can state each one on their own terms rather than getting them all muddled up together.
Right. Yeah. So just as an example, I find that one of the biggest dilemmas a person has, or the biggest contradiction people have inside, is the contradiction between freedom and stability, right? Because we have a part of us that wants to explore and wants new things, but we also have a part of us that wants to be comfortable and wants to stick to what we have and what we're used to, right? And that's something that makes people very contradictory sometimes, because people will start to kind of veer off and then come back and veer off again as well. But I was going to ask you specifically, what I was wondering about was how do you foster a space of kind of vulnerability around other people when you talk about these matters, right? Because ideally you'd like to talk with other people about something in a way that they can understand and not judge you for it, and they can make you feel safe, to just express things and put things out, knowing that, I'm just processing right now. I'm just venting thoughts, and I haven't concluded what I want yet, and I'm still just learning and thinking, and do you want to think with me? How do you have that? Because that sounds like the solution sometimes there.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think it's vital, learning how to be secure in your vulnerabilities. And I think that's something I think I learned from one extreme, because I didn't know how to be that at all until my mid-20s. And because if you're not secure in your vulnerabilities, then you can't be vulnerable with someone else. You're ashamed of who you are and what you're feeling. So I think really, in some ways, I had to find someone who I was particularly comfortable with. Initially, I was seeing a psychologist, because a good psychologist is non-judgmental. So I was able for the first time to talk about my vulnerabilities. That was very important. And then I also found a writer who I particularly liked and got very into literature. And I was able to see vulnerabilities within characters, but within the author as well, come out within that. So that made me secure my vulnerabilities. But also, I think just by myself, having to learn how it is to deal with my emotions and process them, and finding the space. I think the freedom is good in that, finding the space to be vulnerable, because when you're a traveler somewhere, for example, you have an impunity to explore yourself and to also be vulnerable. And yeah, for me, that was, I spent quite a lot of time traveling and living quite remotely, and there was a lot of opportunity within that and it wasn't an easy process, but to allow myself to be vulnerable and deal with those vulnerabilities. And in some ways, if I needed help from a stranger, it was easier than being in a city or being with familiar faces, because you're worried that you'll see, if you ask someone you know, they'll remember how you were in a vulnerable place, and if you feel some shame connected with that on some level, then it puts up a resistance to wanting to ask for that help. But if you're traveling from afar and you see a stranger, in a way you also know you might never see that person again, so it frees you up to sort of ask for that help and to be vulnerable. And as a first step in, I think, for me, learning how to be vulnerable, that helped me a lot.
Yeah, it's said that like one of the first most important things like any psychologist learns is that people negotiate their identities with other people. And yeah, like what that means is like we are constantly negotiating ourselves with the people we are with, right? So when we're with other people, and we're with people who know who we used to be, right? Like they might have certain preconceptions about who we are and how we will act and what we will do. And in some ways, they will perhaps not always be very tolerant of growth, right? So even if they didn't like who you were in the past, they'll still want you to be that person, or they'll still act or treat you in a way which brings that up, right? Like I find that, and this is not necessarily a bad thing, but when I go back to Sweden and I visit my family, I get younger. Like I de-age, like I regress a little bit, and I think everyone does, I think to some extent actually, because you know, they remember how you were as a kid, and you know, to them you're still that little kid that's kind of running around. So I guess you said you had been to some really remote locations. Like what's kind of places have you been to, and how long were you there? And like what's it like when you're isolated, I guess, when you're not seeing anyone? Like how does that change how you act and what you are? Like
yeah, I traveled, I lived in China for a bit, in a very remote part of China. I've traveled in India, but ultimately in the last years I've lived here in Barcelona, and I haven't needed to go far over the world. I just wanted to go to the countryside and just hike. And it doesn't, nature is glorious and it's different everywhere, but the magic of nature is just the space. And I didn't need to travel the other side of the world to find that. So for me, just being in the middle of nowhere, it was a way as well. When I had a lot of, and I think it always applies, you have a lot of personal problems, or you have something going on in your life that's very all-consuming. Nature's a good way of giving it perspective. The vast landscape, you're a tiny dot in the vast landscape, and really in a way you're not that important. Your issues aren't that important in the world. Life goes on. And similarly, being under the stars at night, you're just a tiny speck in the cosmos.
yeah.
Which I find actually makes life also more meaningful at the same time, in terms of that there's a sense of awe and wonder in that. It's when you contemplate that, and it can take you outside of your problems as well. So just for the sense of perspective it brings, I find it's a very nourishing sort of activity to do, really, to find that space. But at the same time, there's a contradiction within it, because too much of it, I don't think is necessarily healthy, but in short bursts, I think it's something very powerful.
Yeah, that's a tug that I feel in myself, because in a way, like, I tend to identify these days as quite extroverted, in the sense that I love to be engaged with communities and to be involved and to be connected to other people, and to talk to other people, if it's making YouTube videos or blogging or expressing myself in some way. But at the same time, I also find myself drawn to these, like, really rural, really abandoned landscapes, right? Like, I feel so at peace and so happy when I visit, for example, Tromsø, Norway, and I walk around the mountains, and it's just me in the mist and the clouds. And the same way, I find myself drawn to places like the Azores, like outside in the Atlantic, or Madeira, or other places, because of their, like, vast green landscapes, and because of the fact that there's not a lot of people there, and that you can just wander. And I find whenever I have these times of quiet and solitude, I have this big, I become more social, like, the more I spend by myself, because the urge to connect with other people kind of increases, right? But at the same time, my head bursts with ideas, and I find my thoughts are so much clearer, and I feel so much more self-aware, because sometimes in the crowds of people, I kind of lose who I am and forget, because I'm so focused on other people's needs or what's happening around me, that I kind of don't know who I am. So it's kind of a tug between, wanting to be ideally you'd want to live close to a city, but also close to nothingness.
Yeah, yeah. And because, it's so stimulating being in a city and meeting all the people you meet. But sometimes, maybe there can be too much of a good thing, because you have a really interesting interaction with someone. And through that, there may be perspectives or ideas that really hit you. But then it's on to the next one and the next one. And maybe there's a value in having some space to process the interactions, the experiences you've lived in a high-octane place like a city, and just letting these wash over you, and internalizing these and making sense of what's happened. Because sometimes, I think from my experience, like, one really powerful interaction is better than 100 good interactions, and just being and just finding the space after that powerful interaction to really make sense of the meaning in it. It can then really reach you deeper within in that space.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, the space, when you've made sense of things in nature, I like to come back to a city, because there it's only through articulating things, I think, ultimately, and through the communication, you're able to make sense of what you've been working out within, whether you can relate to other people like that. So ultimately, I think a meaningful interaction has to be able to help you relate better to other people in the world. And if I've been alone too long, then it's hard to relate to other people. But for a short time, I find often it's helped me relate better to other people. And ultimately, I think you've got to articulate what you're, like, the things you've been thinking about, and they've got to be perceived. You've got to see whether they can be understood by others. Because if someone else can't understand an idea or perspective that's very clear to you inside, then maybe you need to find greater clarity within that. And it's why I think, being in a city is so invaluable, because you can find these interactions and to share with others, and to help you make sense of what you've been processing.
Yeah, I know that cycle also, because I know people that chose to live very rurally for most of their lives, And I know that in some ways, yeah, they did become a little bit more misanthropic almost. Like they will often say things like everyone's an idiot, everyone's stupid, this country is going to go to hell, you know, like everything is bad, you know. And it's the kind of mask you put on because, of course, you don't get to meet people. So, and when you're not spending time meeting people, you build up all these ideas about why you shouldn't meet people, and it becomes like a cycle. Some people call it a parasitical process because it kind of gets you into a loop where you only spiral downwards, right? So it's like it reinforces, why am I not going out and seeing people? Why am I alone? Well, I don't really want to meet people anyways, and it becomes like a negative circle, right?
Yeah, yeah. You can find there's a profundity sometimes when you're in this space, in nature, realizing what life is, and then you get thrown back into a city, or just you go to an ordinary city central bar or cafe, and things seem so trivial, and you can end up really, in one part of you, really despising life, the meaninglessness of it. But and yeah, for sure, there's a part of that. But on the other side, there's a lot of meaning in that. There's a lot of life within that as well. And sometimes the triviality is also very funny. So to be able to laugh at that as well is, if I feel I can't laugh at life, then my time away needs to come to an end, I think. It's just that ability. I think ultimately it's the simplest way to connect, is just to be able to share a joke or to make another person smile, and to be able to, for another person to be able to touch you and make you smile as well, is the way actually in which you begin to open up. So if you lose that ability to see the amusements in life, then I think there's a danger of lapsing into bad places. So yeah.
I would say it as what you need to kind of learn in a way is just to have good conversations with other people, to be and bring your authentic self into every connection and every conversation you meet, so that you feel that you can be yourself around other people, and that you can express yourself, and even if they judge you, you still, you know, trust in who you are, you trust in what you bring, and you gotta also find a way to bring that out of other people too, because everyone is ultimately very fascinating, right? If you get down underneath, every single person has a story to tell, and you know, a unique way of thinking about the world, and we are very social in the sense that, you know, when we connect with another person, it's like our brains become one, and we are able to solve problems that we wouldn't have been able to solve on our own. When we're on our own, often we end up getting stuck in a kind of cycle where it's like we're constantly going over the same problem or negative thought pattern over and over again. And we don't know how to answer it or what to do with it. But social interactions have the potential to bring up some kind of third factor that you never considered, and maybe that's not what helps you ultimately figure out what it is that you feel and what it is that you think, but it's the kind of starting spark that gets you thinking, and then in a way, like what I talk about is like a pendulum effect, where you kind of have to switch back and forth between the two, right? You go out, you connect with other people, and you try to bring your best version of yourself into that interaction. And then you go home and you reflect on what you did and how you acted and what happened. And you think about, you know, what more things am I hiding inside? What more things should I consider for the future? What more things can I learn about myself? And then after you know that, you go back out again, kind of. Goes back and forth.
Yeah. And it's a nice way of putting it. And then you want to go back out and see other people, and it's replenishing, and it's revitalizing as well to do that. Because I think sometimes one of the biggest dangers, and I know with myself from back in time, is for sure an element of it, and I think just in life it happens a lot, is you just want to be around other people to escape life and your own problems, and you don't really care about the person in front of you. It's just you just need to be around them to unfurl maybe your own unhappiness to some extent, or just to escape life. But when it can be done, when you actually value the life spark, the energy of the other person and their perspectives, and that gives you something on which to feel more secure and happy in your own space, then that's really meaningful.
Yeah.
And then you don't need to go back looking for the comfort of some meaningless interaction with someone else.
I remember you were talking about doing sports and running and things like that, right? And in a sense, you were talking about how much you enjoy that, but also how sometimes that could be a way to avoid and run away from problems in a way. So isn't it strange how, often positive things that we want, like socializing or exercise or other things, passions can somehow become warped, right? You have a thing that you really love, but then you pursue it in a way which makes it corrupted, which makes it the opposite of what you wanted it to be, kind of. How does that happen? Why do we kind of ruin things that are fun for us by making them less fun, I guess?
Yeah. I suppose anything taken to excess is always just going to be dangerous in life. And yeah, there can be because I suppose when you do what most resonates and what you most love doing and makes you feel best. So I don't know, in sports I've always enjoyed sport because the child within me, it's where I feel most happy, most free. It's what I'm naturally drawn to. But in some ways, in a good way, I'm connecting with my child, but also I'm just remaining a child by doing that. And that's not ultimately a helpful place to be as well. I've got to, because I'm just living in a childish bubble, and maybe not, it's a way of deflecting from the world around me, and within that there's a lot of fears, so it's a way of running away from fears because it's a safe space to go to when you're in your passions. You're doing what you want to do, but you're kind of without fear when you're doing that, and ultimately there's never not a lot of fears we have to confront in life and to deal with, and if we run from our fears in life, we're never going to live a meaningful or fulfilling life.
That's a really interesting kind of dichotomy you kind of bring up with passion versus fear, kind of on the other side in a sense. And I had never thought of it like that, that maybe when we pursue hedonistic things that we find enjoyable, we sometimes also avoid things that we don't enjoy and that we find less desirable, I guess. So what do we do in order to make sure that our passion is, I guess, rounded and balanced in a sense, that it's an outlet we pursue because we love it and not because we're running away from something that we don't love or that we struggle with or don't want to face?
Yeah, I suppose it's ultimately becoming more conscious of what it is your passion gives you and how it nourishes you within, and becoming aware as you do it, the life perspectives that it brings to you. And those can be translated, I guess, into many other areas of life as well. So you can pursue other activities through this. Always when you start pursuing a new activity, I think there's going to be some kind of fear involved in that as well, because you're not going to be very good when you start doing it. So I suppose, yeah, and I don't know, I think when I go, because I've enjoyed running a lot or long distance hiking, and a lot of ideas or things that I should do come to me while I'm doing it, or in the aftermath of it, when I'm just finished, like something just strikes me. And so in a way I know the steps I should be taking in life, and maybe fear holds me back from doing those, but you realize things. So going with those insights and using them to do things in life. And yeah, I think when you do meaningful things in life, there'll be a certain fear involved in that, which is a good thing.
That makes sense. I'm gonna round off this by kind of a metaphor that I've had in my head for a long time, and I think you might relate to it a little bit. And it's that sometimes when you're running towards something, you might be super excited, you might be super enthusiastic about where you're going or where you're headed next or what's going to happen, or just the feeling of running in itself, right? But what you're not realizing sometimes is the fact that, maybe you're running away from something at the same time, right? So maybe there's things behind you at the moment that are, scaring you, that are weighing on you. And so I think we should be careful when we are running to make sure that, when we have that a feeling of adrenaline pumping and that kind of excitement, well, the other side of excitement is kind of fear. A lot of the time, it's you can when you're sitting in a roller coaster, you can either respond to that by the kind of excitement of I'm going down a roller coaster, or no, I'm on a roller coaster, get me off, right? And the same can be, I think we don't know, our body doesn't know how to tell the difference between excitement and fear. It doesn't really know what the difference is, in a sense. So it's worth thinking about the fact that these two things often walk hand in hand, and to recognize both emotions, and that they often communicate the same way, in a weird way, in our system. And when we have excitement, we also always have a little bit of fear.
Like that, yeah.
Anyways, I would say thank you so much for joining in on this conversation. It was really nice talking to you, and thanks to everyone watching and for supporting my channel. And if you want to support my channel, you can always check out patreon.com/Erik Thor. I'll provide the link down below. And I'll see you all in the next video.
Cool. Hey, thanks, Erik.